Hi everybody, welcome to the second series of Baking Gems with Shane. I'll just give it a few minutes not a few minutes, give it about a minute or so until a few people log in. How are we all keeping? Great, we have some people on already, that's amazing. Hi guys, let me just set up my laptop here. Hello everybody. The usual, if you could give me a little thumbs up or a little heart or something just to let me know that the audio is working okay, so I'm not talking to myself. Hi guys. We're still waiting for a little wave. There's a good few people on already, which is brilliant. If you can give me a little thumbs up, that'd be great, just to let me know that you can hear me loud and clear. Hi, love gem rise for prep. There we go. We're starting off on a nice little positive there as well. I presume you can hear me. That is amazing. How are we all today? Monday, almost over, thankfully. The beginning of the week. Amazing, you can hear me nice and loud. That's great. So this is the second series of Baking Gems with Shane. We had one, I think it was maybe, 2 weeks ago? And we had a really a great response. Lots of people tuned in, lots of amazing questions. And I have my laptop just set up over here, so I am just looking over here. We got a great response again, loads of baking questions coming in. So again, anyone who's watching the live here today, don't be afraid to pop your questions in the comment section below, and I'll keep an eye on those throughout the live, and hopefully I'll be able to answer them all for you. So yes, I'll give it another little second. We have a few people on, which is amazing. What I love to do is find out where you all tuning in from, what part of the country or the world. We had somebody from the Netherlands, and I can't remember where the last one was. There's someone else that was a little bit further afield, a little bit more exotic now than Dublin. So yeah, if you could pop in the little comment section where you're tuning in from, that would be brilliant. And again, don't be shy. This is a nice little chat here. If you have any baking questions, or if you bake something and it hasn't worked out, or if you're thinking about trying a recipe and you're not 100% sure, fire your questions down below and I'll be able to answer them all. Cork, the real capital. We're not going to kickstart that off straight away. But Cork is amazing, so it is. I absolutely adore Cork. I would consider living there. It's a really lovely city. So, as I was saying, we had some amazing questions in a couple of weeks ago, and myself, firstly, I'm Shane Smith. I should have introduced myself. For those of you tuning in that you don't know, I am the brand ambassador for Gempack Foods, and absolutely love working with the guys. A real creative team and really great products as well. It's easy for me to create nice bakes when you're working with great ingredients. Where do we have your Offaly here? Delighted to have the signal. Oh, listen, I am from Cavan originally, so I know very much the struggle is real whenever I go home. There has been times where I've hopped into the car and drove out to the main road to get signal, so I hear it as all. Where are we going here? Helen is in with a question straight away. Brilliant, Helen, thank you. Why does the sponge cake stick to the bottom of a dinner plate when being cut? Well, I suppose, Helen, to answer that, your sponge cake, obviously, it depends on the mix that you're using. If it's a kind of a softer sponge as well, and if your sponge isn't cooled completely, sometimes it can, I wouldn't say like sweat, but the heat of that will just cause it to stick slightly. What I always do is just have a little disc of parchment paper, and you can put that onto your serving plate, whether that's a cake stand or plate, and then assemble your cake on that if it is sticking. So yeah, sometimes your cake does stick to the bottom of the plate. A good cake knife is important as well, a good cake slice to kind of get in there. But what I would say is, yeah, it depends on the recipe that you're using. It could be a kind of a softer cake, whether it's made with like an oil base, like a chiffon style cake. So it can stick a little bit. So yeah, a little bit of parchment paper on the bottom would be ideal for that. So yeah, we had loads of questions in between the questions coming in on the Gem social media and my own social media here on Instagram and on Facebook. And we're going to kickstart off here with some of our questions. Again, guys, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you have any baking questions, I see Sonia has joined, an avid baker from Cork as well. Thank you, Sonia, for joining. I hope you are well. Michelle has asked the question, if a recipe calls for self-raising flour, but I only have plain flour, can I use it? You can, but what I will say is you have to obviously add a raising agent to your flour, because if the recipe calls for self-raising, then it needs a raising agent in there. So again, this video is going to be saved onto the Gem page. Cork again, Cork representing strong today. So yeah, if you are going to the recipe calls for self-raising flour, then you need to have a raising agent in there. This video is going to be saved down on the grid, so I'm going to give them lots of little tips and kind of not recipes, but more, I suppose, weights and stuff. So again, you can watch back and keep track of that. But if you need to make your own self-raising flour, what I always do is for every 100 grams of plain flour, you add in 1 level teaspoon of bicarb. Sonia is asking there. Yes, Sonia, I guess that's a really good question. So add 1 teaspoon of baking powder per 100 grams of plain flour. And again, that will create and make self-raising flour. If you are stuck and you've none in the house, the one thing you need to do is to get a lovely even dispersion of baking powder throughout your plain flour. I would suggest sieving it 2 or 3 times just to ensure that it's evenly distributed throughout all of the flour. So again, for every 100 grams of plain flour, add in 1 level teaspoon of baking powder. Sieve that 2 or 3 times, and then you'll have a homemade self-raising flour, so you can use that as well. Sonia, is there a difference between baking powder and bicarb? Yes, there is. So a bicarbonate of soda is activated between acids and alkalines. So you need something to kind of to kickstart a baking soda or a bicarbonate of soda. So generally when you see a recipe that calls for a bicarbonate of soda, it is generally made using like buttermilk, or if you see soda breads or scones, sometimes it needs that acid to activate the bicarb of soda or the bread soda. Where a baking powder, you don't need any acids or alkalines to activate it. You just sieve your baking powder through whatever it is, and it works straight away. But yeah, for your soda, you need a reaction to get the bread soda or the bicarbonate of soda to work. We have another question in about baking powder and bread soda later on, so we'll jump into that one as well. It's to test how you know that they're still strong, that they're not gone out of date, because it is one of those things that sits in the press for a while, and sometimes you mightn't use a hell of a lot of it. So it's important to check that it's still within use. Casey asked the next question. Casey wants to know is, how do you make cake flour and what is its uses? Now, I'm going to take a gulp of tea for this one, because we are jumping over to the States. We are going to America for this, because if things weren't complicated enough here, America has a huge amount of different names of flours and stuff as well. So sometimes if you're jumping online and you're looking for recipe inspiration then as well, just looking, Helen has asked here, what way does the chef learn things? Yes, Helen, that's perfect. I will jump onto that one as well. So basically, the question about the flours. So for the cake flours in America, that or the US, if you're online and you're looking for recipe inspiration, then you just need to look at I suppose the different uses and the different types. We call it plain flour here in America. Sometimes they call it all-purpose flour. Cake flour is another type of flour that they use in the States. So if you do come across a recipe online for that, it might throw you a little bit. So basically what cake flour is a very soft plain flour. I have the notes here. It is really low in protein. So it would have about maybe 5%, where your regular plain flour that we use here would have up to 10 to 13%. So this cake flour is basically to be used if you're making an extremely delicate, soft, light sponge, or a cookie, or even if it's a scone, something like that. It's a really, really light flour. So you can make that here and try it yourself and play around with it if you do come across recipes online and it calls for cake flour. So basically for every 125 grams of plain flour, remove 2 tablespoons of that and replace that with 2 tablespoons of corn flour. So again, corn flour here, I suppose we're more using it in thickening agent for thickening sauces. Sometimes I put it into meringues as well. But your corn flour will lower the amount of protein that's in there and just leave you with a much more delicate, softer flour. You do need to be careful though when you're using it, because there is a difference between cake flour and all-purpose / plain flour. You require a good amount of gluten in there and protein to hold some cakes together. So cake flour would not be suitable for certain recipes. So again, but it's more a case if you come across a recipe online and you see that it calls for cake flour, again, that is more Americanized, and it basically, in simple terms, is just plain flour with the addition of some corn flour. But yes, that is that. I hope it answers again. So again, about 125 grams of plain flour, remove 2 tablespoons of that and add in 2 tablespoons of corn flour. Sheila, next question. Actually, sorry, I will go back to the last question there about the how do you line the baking tins. So to be honest with you, I don't think there's any secret in lining baking tins. What I personally like to do, depending on the cake that you're making, if it's an extremely wet mix, then obviously you would line the base and the sides of your tin. 9 times out of 10, if your cake tins are pretty new or they're not overly loved, you can just line the base of the tin. So what I like to do then is just to put a square of parchment paper on the table, put my loose bottom cake tin base underneath the parchment paper and just close the cake tin on top. And that way you're actually just kind of closing it onto the paper. That way you've got a beautiful, tight, waterproof or just a seal around it as well. Again, if you are using a wet mix, I would suggest I always just cut long rectangles, cut them so you have nice little strips, and then those little strips will sit flat on the base of your cake tin again. So again, when it comes to cake bands and stuff like that, like you can wrap the outside of the tin if you're baking a cake, like whether it's like a simnel cake or a Christmas cake, that it actually doesn't burn too much, or it doesn't overcook before the center of the cake is cooked. But generally speaking, as I said, a base parchment on the bottom generally works for me depending on the cake that you're making. Where are we going here? Sheila wants to know, is it possible that my hands can be too hot for pastry? So I think Sheila's saying here that she is dipping her hands in cold water. I think we've all heard that pastry chefs should have cold hands, especially when you're making pastries. I've got the hottest hands in the world. I'm warm 24/7. So I do get where you're coming from. Sometimes it can be tricky. So what I would say to you is you can go down the route of having a little basin of cold water beside you and dipping your hands into that and drying them. It just seems a lot of work for me. So obviously, if the issue is your hands being overly warm, what I would say to you is get into the habit of using equipment. So again, I have a list here as well. You can use bench scrapers, bowl scrapers, rolling pins, that kind of thing. So kind of rely more on the equipment to work with the dough, more so than your hands. If you find for certain recipes that your hands are too warm and it could be melting flour or melting butter or something like that. And what I would say is, well, gloves. So if you have the latex gloves or any of those kitchen gloves, put them on you as well, and that'll act as a barrier as well. Again, you can dip your hands in the cold water. Completely up to you. It does seem like a lot of work dipping and drying and all that. But what I would say is it is important to understand how your dough feels. So I'm a huge believer in getting your hands in there and getting stuck in as well. But if your hands are very warm, what I would say, get into the use of have some of your equipment beside you, whether that is a bench scraper or a dough divider, just to kind of help you so you're not handling the dough as much. I see we have more people joining in, which is great. You can let me know in the comment section where you're all tuning in from, and if you have any baking questions, fire them into, or any questions at all, fire them into the question box below the comment section, and I'll keep an eye on that. So what else do we have here? We have Siobhan. Why do my cookies always turn out flat? That's one of these things where it's, again, it relies heavily on the recipe that you're using. But if you've made them before and they turn out great, and you've made them again and they're quite flat, then you could have a couple of issues there. What I would say to you is the longer you refrigerate your cookie batter or your cookie dough for, generally speaking, the less they spread when you do bake them. Take them directly from the fridge. Have your oven preheated. So you're basically taking it from one and putting it into the other. So you're not taking them out of the fridge and then preheating your oven for 10-15 minutes. So again, have your oven preheated. The longer you leave them in the fridge, the better. Your baking powder and your bread soda, depending on what you're using, is basically how, like, it could be old. So you might have to test that. Again, that is a question that I am coming up on here as well, so I'll touch base on that one later. And then your oven temperature might be off. We have a question in there: how long does it take for sponge cake to cook? When taken out of the to cool. Okay, Helen, I'll jump back in there in a second. So yes, so again, rest or chill your cookie dough for as long as possible. Take it directly from the fridge into your oven, and you generally have thicker cookies. And again, your bread soda or baking powder could be old, so it could be worth checking that, because they're not doing the job of helping them rise, so they're kind of staying quite flat. And oven temperature could be off. So again, play around with your oven temperatures. And I said this on the last live as well. Invest in an oven thermometer. They're relatively cheap. Pop it into the oven that way, because ovens are old, and just like anything, after a certain period of time, it can be off by 10 degrees or so. So that will affect your bake. Helen, is it Helen? Sorry, Helen, to answer your question about how long does it take to cool, again, that all depends on the cake that you're using, so that can vary. If it's generally a sponge cake, there's a very important factor that you don't leave it in the tin for too long when it comes out of the oven, because the natural steam that's in there from the hot sponge will cause it to sweat, and you can end up with a soggy sponge. So what I like to do, like for a Victoria or a vanilla sponge, take it out of the oven, put it onto a wire rack in the tin, just leave it sitting for about a minute or so, and then carefully demold it, remove it from the tin and leave it on your wire rack to cool. And again, the thicker and more dense your cake is, like a chocolate fudge or a like a lemon yogurt kind of like cake like that, like a pound cake, they will take much longer to cool down. They could take anything up to maybe an hour and a half. Generally speaking, for Victoria sponge, 35-40 minutes, it should be cool. So yeah, just to keep that in mind. Which is best for scones, plain, self-raising, or strong flour? I just see G. Kavanagh, so I don't know your first name, but thank you for that. This is like this is like the cream, the jam, and the butter on the scones, as in which goes first. What I would say to you is I generally never make scones with strong flour. So again, the reasoning behind that is strong flour is really, really high in gluten, and it's really good for breads that are elasticated and take lots of kneading and proving time. So I generally, Georgina, thank you, Georgina. So yeah, I would say no to strong flour, because you're going to end up with a heavier scone if you over mix it. Now, I have made scones where I've worked previously, where I didn't have flour and all I had was strong, and I made them on strong flour and they did work out. But the secret is you literally cannot even touch the dough. You're mixing your butter in there and you just turn it out, cut it and bake it. But I wouldn't go with a strong flour, to be honest with you. Worst case scenario, if your back is against the wall and you need to make scones and you only have strong, then yes, but ideally go with your plain or self-raising. When it comes to plain or self-raising, what I would say is, another question, how much self-raising flour would you get for making your own? So basically, I'll get to that in Helen in a second. Plain or self-raising, I have recipes for both. I have recipes for scones that are basically plain flour and the self-raising. What I would say to you is you can control the amount of raising agent you put into a plain flour scone. So if you want to put in a little bit more, if you want to put in a little bit less, with your self-raising flour, it's already in the flour, so you're just following that recipe. But I've got amazing results from both plain and self-raising, so I can't really say which is better. Depends, recipes for both. Again, you can control the amount of raising agent you're putting in, like bread soda to a plain flour, where you can't. And I would say keep away from your strong flour. There was a question there, I'm going to go back to it. Which is best, I don't know, where is it here? How much self-raising flour would you get for making your own? Self-raising flour, I think what you mean there, Helen, I'm not sure, is if you want to make your own, I'll jump back up to that. That was 100 grams of plain flour. You add in 1 level teaspoon of baking powder. So then you'll have 100 and something grams then of self-raising flour out of that. So depends again, if you're using 1 kg of plain flour, then obviously you're increasing that as well, and you're adding in 10 teaspoons of baking powder. So the more obviously plain flour you use, the more you'll get out of that as well. So that is cookies being flat. Elizabeth wants to know, how do you get a flat top on your cake? So there are a couple of ways you can ensure this happens. Is sometimes the biggest reason that causes your cakes to kind of I suppose peak and crack at the top is that your mix can be over mixed, and that way you have getting back to the different flours, you're working the gluten that's in the cake mix in that flour, and it kind of tightens up, almost like when you cook a steak or something. You know, your meat is firm, you know what I mean? And you have to give it time to rest. So the more you work the flour, the more you're increasing the gluten that's in there. So I would say to you is over mixing your cake batter can cause it to peak. Also, what I would say is try and lower your oven temperature, Elizabeth. Again, depending, most cake recipes call for about 170 degrees centigrade. If you drop it to 160, keeping in mind that you will have to cook it longer because you're reducing the temperatures. But by gradually, I suppose, bring the heat is lower, your cake is cooking slower, and it not always, but it can help with the peaking of the cake as well. What else do we have here? Yeah, and then do you know what, Elizabeth, as well, what I generally do as well, I think, and Elizabeth, I know that you bake as well, that if you do have a sponge cake that peaks on top or has a little thing, I generally just cut that, turn it upside down, and you're using the base of that sponge as the top, so you're getting a lovely flat top. So you're actually not using the peaked side. So again, if your cake does peak, with a carving knife, just top that, turn it upside down, and you're going to be using that for the center of the cake, and you can sandwich that with buttercream or cream or whatever it may be. But you're actually, the base of the cake is on the top, so you have a beautiful flat layer on top that is ideal then for covering and decorating and all those things as well. Linda wants to know, why do scones sometimes rise with a muffin top or crack? We touched on this the last time we were on, Linda, as well. And scones a tricky one. Scones, again, plain flour, or self-raising flour. The secret to a good scone, in my opinion, is the less handling and touching that you do, the better. Because again, the more you work that dough, the more that you knead it, the more that you do all of that good things with it, you're just getting a tougher scone. So what I would say to you is try, and obviously if you're the rubbing in method, so if you're rubbing in your butter into your flour and sugar, and then you're adding in whether that may be buttermilk or milk, whatever it is that you're using as well. When you add your liquid and you bring it together, once you have that shaggy, kind of a little bit distressed looking dough where it doesn't look like it's all completely mixed in, I would stop there and turn that out onto your table and just gently finish it. And again, with the scones, cutter, dip it in flour, push down into your dough and lift up. If you start twisting and doing all of this, which is a natural, it's natural, I think, for all of us to do, but when you start twisting your cutter, then you are, you're not getting a clean cut on your scone. So sometimes then when it rises at an angle as well. So a nice clean cut, and try not to touch the dough as much as possible, just minimal kind of working on the dough. Don't have a name on this one here, but it says, why does my sweet pastry shrink when baking? That is a super, super, super popular question. I get this a lot. You see an awful lot of recipes online where someone's making a lemon tart or a baked lemon tart, where they'll actually just roll the pastry into the case and then leave the overhang of pastry, blind bake it, and then trim it off. Now you can do that. I just find it, again, it's adding on a lot of work to something that, you know, again, it's up to the chef and their cook as well and their preference. But what I would say to you is the key reason, I think that's a running theme throughout today's kind of Q&A here, is resting period and how important resting is. So if you make your sweet pastry or your pâte choux or whatever it is that you're using to make your tart, whether that's for a lemon tart, chocolate tart, apple pie, whatever it may be, once you make your dough, your sweet pastry, wrap it and chill it, minimum 30 minutes. The longer, again, you leave it to rest in the fridge, the longer, the better the dough will relax, and it'll just be a lot easier to work with, and it won't shrink. As well, when you roll your pastry on to your tart shell, ensure, so your angles of your tin, that your pastry doesn't just come down like this. You want it to go down and into the edges of the tin. So take a little bit of time. What I always do is take a little ball of pastry and just push that raw pastry into the I suppose the crevices of the tin that you're using, and ensure that it's up the side. Because the problem is, if your pastry comes down here and there's a gap here, when you push that in, after you cut it and trim it and it's beautiful and neat, as it bakes and it gets obviously warmer, there's no pastry here. So this here will shrink down, and then the sides of your tart case will shrink as well. So just ensure that when you are lining it, that the pastry is actually down around the base fully, and important to also rest your pastry once you've lined it. Not only rest the pastry once you've made the pastry, but also rest it once you've lined the tin. 20 minutes in the fridge and then blind bake it. And again, just as I said about the cookies earlier, take it out of the fridge, put in your baking beans and straight into your preheated oven. Don't be hanging around, leaving it sitting out for 10-15 minutes at room temperature. So again, anything that you bake from like a cool fridge temperature, the better, because it'll hold its shape as well. So there are just a couple of reasons as well. Don't overwork your sweet pastry, let it rest, ensure that the tin is all filled in properly, and rest your dough again in the tin before you bake it. Hello guys, we got loads of new people joining in here. Just doing a little Q&A with Jem here as their brand ambassador. So if you have any baking related questions, fire them into the comment section below and I will happily answer them. And we are going to move on here to the next one. Anne wants to know how to make a custard filling for pastel de nata. So if anyone, excuse my butchered pronunciation, I've eaten enough of them, I should know how to pronounce them. But for anyone who doesn't know, a pastel de nata is the traditional Portuguese egg custard tart. So delicious. And I think you might have watched the video over on my Instagram last week where I made them. They're just utterly delicious. So basically it's just a puff pastry fillet case, and it's filled down with a baked custard, vanilla custard. So good. I should take that back, not vanilla custard. It's more, I suppose, lemon and cinnamon is the main spices, not vanilla. But yeah, baked custard. So basically, Anne, I'm not going to get into recipes and stuff here, but a pastel de nata filling is basically, it's quite similar to a pastry cream, like a creme pat, where you're actually cooking the custard over a gentle heat until it thickens up with the addition of flour. So it is basically similar to a creme patissiere, but it has a different flavour profile. And that's what we use. Hi guys, thank you all for tuning in. Let me know in the comment section where you're tuning in from. I think the most exotic part of the country is Cork at the moment that we have people tuning in from. And Offaly, we have Wi-Fi down in Offaly as well. So yeah, let me know where you're tuning in from. And again, any questions, baking related questions, pop them in the question bar. Joan, is there any way to test my baking powder and baking soda to see if they're fresh? Now, I have mentioned this a couple of times throughout the live that we have Kerry on the map. So Cork and Kerry, definitely. We have Meath, good. We're getting very tropical altogether. Cork and Kerry, definitely. The south is very much representing this evening. Thank you so much for tuning in. Love Meath as well. So yes, we have, the question here was, checking if your baking powder and your baking soda or bicarbonate of soda is still fresh. One of those things that I've said that it can be sitting in the press of the cupboard a little bit too long sometimes, because you might not use it all that often if you're not baking every single day or a couple of times a week. It can sit there, and it's happened to me 100 times as well. So to check, taking your baking powder, put a little bit onto a side plate and add like a tablespoon of warm hot water. And if you see it kind of bubbling and fizzing, then you know that the baking powder is fine. As I touched on with the soda, you need like an acid and stuff to activate that. So what I would say to you is pop some of your bicarbonate of soda or your bread soda again onto a little side plate and add in a few drops of vinegar, whatever vinegar you have that you use in your fish and chips, or white wine vinegar, or any vinegars at all, and put a few drops of that onto your bread soda. And again, if you see a little reaction happening there, then you know that your soda is fine. If nothing happens with either of them, then I would be, for the sake of a couple of euro, I'd probably be either chucking them out or getting new ones in, because you're going to waste more money by buying and spending ingredients on eggs and butter and sugar and all that. And then if your soda doesn't work, or your baking powder, then it all kind of goes in the bin. So next we have here Michael. Michael says, I am dairy intolerant. Can I substitute oil for butter in recipes? What is your view on this? Okay, Michael, what I would say to you is, if a recipe calls for butter, generally speaking, I would stick to what the recipe says. Okay, so I understand that you are dairy intolerant, so there are some great alternatives. You can actually pick up loads of really good dairy plant-based butters at the moment and just substitute that for the regular butter. Also, there is, if you've tried it before, it's the Indian ghee. It basically is heat treated butter, and it's heated until the milk solids separate from the butter, and they're removed, and then you're left with this beautiful ghee that's used then for frying. You can deep fry with it. Obviously, when you heat butter to a certain temperature, like if you're making brown butter, or I think we've all burnt butter on the pan, it's actually the milk solids that's in the butter that's burning. So if you remove those from the butter, then you're left with this beautiful golden butter that you can use. And again, the milk solids is taken away, so it is suitable, as far as I'm aware, for dairy intolerant people as well. So just to keep that in mind, and it's really good for baking too. Recipes that call for oil, you can use that absolutely no problem. Use a neutral oil like a sunflower vegetable oil. Substituting oil directly out for butter can end in tears, because certain recipes are tested for butter and there is a difference, and you probably get a heavier cake sometimes if you're substituting one for the other. So just pay a little bit of attention. But I would say, Michael, ideally if you can substitute a plant-based butter for the regular butter instead of swatching it out for oil. Darren wants to know, is steam necessary when baking yeasted breads? And if yes, how do I do this? Yeah, Darren, that's a really, really good question. So whenever you go to the lengths of making a beautiful yeasted, whether that's a loaf of bread, whether that is cinnamon buns, whether that's anything that's a yeast enriched dough, whether that's my mind's gone blank now, like a barmbrack or something like that you're putting yeast into, brioches, all of those kind of yeast based breads. When you've made the dough and filled it and egg washed it and it's all ready to go into the oven, with the injection of steam, just gives that little kick and helps your bread rise so much better. And it also helps with the steam to get a lovely crust on your bread as well. So what I would say to you is preheat your oven. Generally speaking, when you're baking a yeasted bread, your oven is preheated to 180, 200, 220, depending on what it is that you're baking. So your oven is really nice and hot. What I would say to you is put a baking tray, like a shallow baking tray, into the bottom of your oven. So then you have your oven preheated 220. Again, nice and gently, you're putting in, whether it's a loaf of bloomer bread or a focaccia or brioches or cinnamon buns, put those into the middle of the oven and have a cup of water, cold or room temperature water, and just throw that carefully into the baking tray that you have in the oven. So you're preheating that tray in the oven as well. And so it's nice and hot. So when you're putting in your tray of your brioches, let's just say, or your focaccia, you have your tray on the bottom, get a cup of water, throw that into the hot tray. That will naturally create steam. Now, again, please take care when you're doing this, because there's nothing worse than a steam burn. I think we've all done it at one point where we've opened a pot, whether we're boiling vegetables or something. The steam burn can sometimes actually be worse than the physical burn of water. So again, throw some hot water or cold water, whatever it is, onto the tray that you have in the oven, and close the oven door straight away, and that will give your bread an injection of steam and help it to rise then for the initial stages, because there's no point in doing it halfway through the bake. It has to be done at the very beginning just to get a nice kind of rise. So I hope that helps, Darren. Mary has asked, should I use dark brown sugar or light brown sugar when a recipe calls for brown sugar? Again, really, really good question, Mary. So again, you see tons. I'm going to have a gulp here of tea. If you see recipes calling for brown sugar, what I would say to you is, depending on your flavor preference, if you want a really rich caramelly flavor, then use the dark brown sugar. Otherwise, if you want a lighter flavor of the sugar, go with the light soft brown sugar. If in doubt, I generally coast along the middle and go with a nice light. Jam have a really, really, really good light soft brown sugar. They also have a lovely dark soft brown sugar as well, which is really great for like coming up to, I'm not going to mention the C word, but that time of year after Halloween, for baking cakes and stuff, that adds such a beautiful flavor to your cakes. So 100% I'd be recommending the dark sugar for those kind of bakes. But again, during the summer, like if you're using nice little, you can even make pavlovas with brown sugar, you can make cookies with brown sugar. It just adds a little extra flavor profile. Really, really nice. No name on this one, but it says, do I really need all my ingredients to be at room temperature? ? Yes. Again, unless your recipe states that your ingredients should be cold, like cold butter, or if you're putting in cold liquids to that as well, always ensure that your ingredients are at room temperature. I think it's a rule of thumb. I think a lot of people I could be wrong in saying this, generally keep their eggs outside. I do, but I go through quite a large volume of eggs, so I don't really have them sitting around for too long. But generally speaking, if you're or even if you prefer to keep your eggs and stuff in the fridge, 100%, but take them out maybe 15-20 minutes before you bake with them, and that way it just gives them a little bit of time to kind of come up to room ambient temperature, and it's better to work with it. The amount of times that I've seen people making a sponge or as any sort of a bake and the butter is cold, it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. You're trying to add eggs into that and the batter can split. So again, what I would say to you is do ensure that if you are being super organized in baking and your recipe does call for room temperature ingredients, always ensure that they are at room temperature, especially your butter. Okay, so where are we now? Josephine is the last question this evening, and Josephine has asked, how do I fix split buttercream? Is that possible? So we'll just talk about the American style buttercream, because I think that's probably the most popular one people make, and that is just your equal measures of room temperature butter and icing sugar and cream together until you get a lovely. Sometimes it can split. Sometimes if you're making like a cream cheese buttercream frosting or a covering for a cake, it can split. What I find, or I have done before, is if your mix has split and you just take some of that mix out, put it into a little Tupperware container or a bowl and just microwave it and melt it completely until you're left with a liquid, and then add that liquid back into your buttercream and whip it up, and generally speaking that will rescue the buttercream. It'll bring it back together again. So that is my little tip on that one, and that's it. We had a good... Oh, no problem at all, Georgina. Thank you very much for your message, and thank you for your question as well. That's it, guys. We had loads of lovely questions in there again. So I will be saving this down on the Gem page here. So again, don't worry if you didn't pick up on all of the little tips, or if you just tuned in for the last part, you can jump back in and watch it again. Helen, you are more than welcome. No problem at all. My pleasure. I want to know, actually, did anyone try out the little tips that I gave about baking cupcakes and putting the rice in the bottom of the tray? You'll have to jump onto the last video to listen to that one. I gave a nice little tip there. People really liked it. But yeah, guys, that is all. I just want to say thank you so much for taking probably half an hour, 40 minutes out of your evening to spend it with me here. If you are looking for loads, and I mean loads of gorgeous bakes, if you head on over to the Gem Pack Food websites, again that will be linked in the bio, and hit up the recipe section there. I've created some really gorgeous recipes for the guys over at Gem, from simple cookies to large cakes, to you name it, we've done it, and we have so many amazing recipes coming as well. There's some gorgeous recipes on the way, so delighted to share more with you all really soon. But yeah, if you're looking for any inspiration, or if you have any baking questions, well, first of all, inspiration, head over to the Gem Pack Food websites. Don't be afraid to send Gem a message if you have any baking questions, or you can send myself a message. My social media is at Chef Shane Smith. Send me a message there if you have any questions, or alternatively, send a message to the guys over at Gem and they will happily send it on to me, and I will answer any questions you have. I see people are starting to tune in now as I'm about to log off. Guys, I just wanted to say thank you again for tuning in. I hope that you all have a lovely evening, and we have another episode coming up actually really soon. So we'll be putting out the little Q&A question box again, and actually next week with Gem we're doing jam making and using preserved sugars and jam sugars and just the different types of sugars and what they're used for. So again, if you've ever tried to make jam and it hasn't worked out for you, or you have any questions on different types of sugars, keep an eye out on the Gem social media pages, and we will be putting that up. I believe it's next week. We'll confirm what day we're doing that, so you can tune in. But that's it, guys. Thank you so much again. I hope that you all have a lovely evening, and I'll talk to you all soon.